What I want to talk about is organizational stewardship. Some of you know this, but my wife and I, we've been married for, it'll be 9 years this June, and we're having our first child. She is due in June, and I'm just like a lifetime learner, so if there's something for me to learn, like I'm reading books like crazy. So as you can imagine, I'm reading like every parenting book I can get my hands on. I'm reading blogs like strategy, and I'll tell you what, like it is way easier to be a parent when you're like, or to give parenting advice. Like I love preaching on parenting now because I don't have kids, and it's all theoretical, and I know it's coming. Yeah, yeah. I'm super excited. But one of the things, as I'm learning about parenting, one of the things that God has been teaching me is that parenting is stewardship. Parenting is like it's a mind change. Like you have to shift your thinking where it's if you approach it that the child belongs to God and God has entrusted me with this child, it changes the way that you raise that child. And to be honest, my whole life, when I heard about when someone would bring up stewardship, the only way that my mind would think would be in the terms of finances, how we steward our financial resources that God has entrusted us with. And through this, like getting ready to raise a child and a daughter and wanting her to be someone who loves and fears God, it's taught me that stewardship is so much more than finances. And so what I want to talk about today is stewardship on a broader level than just financial for our church. And it is a big part of it. In fact, it's going to be one of the things that we do talk about. And I would even encourage you that the Nelson Searcy, the quadrants, that if you want to learn on how to teach stewardship, that is a great way to do it. When Pastor Rick asked me to do stewardship, that's what he was hoping I would teach. But I just felt led to do it on a broader scale, organizational stewardship. So the first fill-in is simply a definition, is that stewardship is the act of managing the possessions of another. Speaking of children and how raising a child is stewardship, I was doing a baby dedication last Sunday, and one of the things that I told the mother, it was a single, yes? Oh boy. Oh, that's okay. Those are the only other 4 blanks. So one of them was just going to be the definition, the act of managing possessions of another. But in this baby dedication, it was a single mother, and I told her, like, I was talking about stewardship in this baby dedication. I told her that when we think we are the owner of something, we really do it in whatever we want with that item. And if it's a child, we raise that child however we see fit. But if we believe that this child is God's child, who God has entrusted us with, it changes the level of responsibility. And it ups the ante a little bit, because we're not just raising our child, we're raising God's child. And I think if we approach our church, not just the finances of the church, but if we approach the church in general, that this isn't just our church, these aren't our people, these aren't our resources, but this is God's resources. It changes the way we approach all aspects of our church. So I want to talk about 4 focus areas of organizational stewardship, 4 things that when I think of stewarding the resources, stewarding our church, these are the 4 that first come to mind for me. These obviously aren't every single one of them, but 4 that I think are key. The first one is facilities. On your notes, I left a bunch of space. I wanted to keep the fill-ins to a minimum for this session and just kind of let you take notes as applicable. But when it comes to our facilities, our church buildings, we have to take care of our buildings, but we should also, we should use them. Like it's not, we don't have these facilities, we don't have these buildings just for the sake of having them, to have cool things and nice things. We have them for a much deeper purpose than just having our facilities. My wife grew up in a church. It was a small church in Tonawanda, New York, and she would tell me these stories of while the pastor was preaching his message, if he saw someone chewing gum, he would stop the message and ask the person to go spit out their gum. And I was just thinking, like, wow, like, who are you serving at that point? Are you serving the people, or are you serving your facility? And what he was communicating with that was, my carpet is more important than how people feel in this building. And obviously that is an extreme, but here at One Church, we recently redid the carpet, I don't know, 3 to 5 years ago, and we had a decision to make. We could say, okay, no coffee in the sanctuary. We got new seats. We could say, don't bring the donuts, especially the jelly-filled ones, into the sanctuary. By the way, jelly-filled donuts are the hardest thing to clean up in the world. Like, there is, it looks like a bloodbath out in our foyer because of the jelly-filled donuts. But we had a decision to make. We could either restrict what we do on a regular basis for the sake of the building, or we use the building to serve our people. I kind of use this metaphor when thinking of buildings, is that buildings or our facilities are kind of like a limousine. If you own a limousine, you take care of the limousine. You polish it up. If you have a wedding that you're doing, you clean the interior, you vacuum it. But once your guest arrives, and once they come into the limousine, the inside of the limousine is theirs. You're not asking them, because they're your guests, you're not asking them to wipe your feet. You're not asking them to not bring in their drinks or their food. It is theirs, and then you will take care of it when they're done with it. That's how I view our buildings. We will do the best we can to keep our buildings clean. We will do the best we can to clean it up and prepare it. You do all that too, change the garbages. But when Sunday morning comes, we want the building to be used. It is to serve our people. When I was a youth pastor, we broke a few windows over the years. Any other churches have some broken windows? That was another thing. We could say, okay, no more throwing balls in the church. Or we could say, you know what, we could replace a window every couple times a year, allowing so the kids know this is a welcoming spot. Now, yeah, stop throwing the hard balls. Yeah. Just love children. I'm just kidding. But you get what I'm saying. Like, carpet can be replaced, but a first impression cannot be replaced. So we want to approach our facilities like they're meant to. They're meant to be used. We take care of them, but they're meant to be used. The risk can be, I've seen a lot of churches, they almost operate as if their mission is to have amazing facilities. And you see it in their budget. There's churches that they are so financially strapped that they can't hire the people that they need to hire because they have this amazing facility, but they're strapped by it. They can't do the ministry that they've been called to do because of their quest for an amazing facility. So we don't want to serve our facilities. We want our facilities to serve us. So that's the first one, facilities. The second one is people. We steward people well when we allow people to use their gifts and experiences to serve God. I love what Pastor Rick was talking about in the last session, empowering people to do the work of the ministry. When I transitioned from youth pastor to executive pastor, a few things I did was I started to schedule these conference calls with different executive pastors who were maybe a few steps ahead of our church, like at the next level. And one of the executive pastors I talked with was the pastor at Next Level Church, where we do our coaching. And we had this great conversation. But the one thing I will remember for the rest of my life was he said this thing. He said, 95% of the ministry I do is through the people I serve. And I looked at and I heard that and I thought, okay, I'm at the place where 5% of the ministry I do is through the people, and I'm doing 95% of the tasks. So my goal over the next several years was to try to flip that on its head. And I'm not at 95% now, but my goal has been over the years is to do more through people, leverage the gifts and the people that God has entrusted us with to do the work of the ministry. And I just believe that is stewarding our people well. You've all met Liz. She spoke at our first Elevate here. She was up here last time for the Q&A. Liz, before she came to One Church, she was attending another church, and she wanted to get involved. If you've talked to Liz, you know she is extremely energetic. She is as high capacity as it gets, and she wanted to serve in her other church. But when she approached them to serve, what they said to her was, "Oh, we already have someone who does graphics." And her husband, who's a music teacher, incredible musician, "Oh, we already have a worship team." And you probably know this lesson, that high-capacity people want high-capacity responsibilities. So they attended the church for a little while, but at a certain point, they wanted to get involved, so they found somewhere where they could get involved. What that church didn't do well was steward the gifts and steward the people that they had. So Liz and her husband, they came to our church, and we also had someone who was doing graphics, and we also had a worship team. The graphic designer was me, and I do not like graphic designing very much. But even if I had, it would have been wrong for me, and it would have been a bad stewardship move to say to Liz, "I already got that covered, don't worry about it. You just enjoy Sundays." But rather, I view this as someone that God has entrusted our church with. How can we empower her to do the work of the ministry? I just believe, the Bible talks about this. If we don't steward what God has entrusted with us, if we don't do it well, what does God do? He removes it and he gives it to someone who will. And I believe that's what happens to Liz. She was somewhere where she wasn't being stewarded, so God moved her to somewhere where she could. And history speaks for itself. She became one of our greatest volunteers, and eventually on staff. And now she's overseeing both of our worship leaders and our tech team. And I just can't imagine this place now without Liz and her husband John at this church. So we want to steward people well. One of the things for me, I know, that will prevent me from stewarding people well is my own insecurities. If there's someone, and if it's something like graphic design would be, if I didn't hate it so much, this would be a great example. But if that's something I was passionate about, and Liz came along, and if it's something I was passionate about, out of my insecurity, it would have been really easy to say, "Liz, I got this." Rather than recognizing, first of all, she is way more gifted than I will ever be with that. That is something that God has gifted her with. And by the way, they don't have to, even if she wasn't as great as she was, I think it was Winston Churchill that said, if someone can do something 80% as well as you can do it, let them do it. I think even we could lower that sometimes. If someone can do it 60% as well as we can do it, we let them do it. Otherwise, we would never replace ourselves. When Pastor Rick, and I love this so much, but at a very little experience that I had, he opened up the pulpit to me. And I was not a great communicator at that point. I had some natural abilities, but I didn't understand how to craft a message very well. Maybe 40% as well as you could preach. And he said, "Okay, you can begin to preach." And it was slow. It was a couple times a year, and then it continued to move on, and now it's a couple times a month. But had he never said, "Okay, you can have the pulpit every once in a while," we would still have one communicator. It was him stepping out in faith and not being insecure and saying, "Okay, I'm going to allow this person, and I'm going to steward this person to do something." So we steward our people. We steward our facilities. The third one is this, and I'm very passionate about this one, is our time. And not only our time, but the time of our people. This year, when we were kind of reevaluating the last few years and where we need to go to get to the next step as a church, the two things that we're trying to focus on the most this year is our productivity and how complicated and simple we have things. And we just know that as we grow, we have to make things simpler because it's naturally going to get complicated. Like things, when you have 12 people on staff, communication is very simple. So we can't have 4 ways to communicate with people anymore. We have to simplify it and make it one way. But the other thing, honestly, is productivity. How can we steward the time of our staff well? How can we steward our personal time well? And how do we steward our volunteers' time well also? By the way, this is maybe the biggest challenge when it comes to stewardship because ministry is relational, right? It is maybe the most relational job on the planet. So our tendency, and my tendency, is let's have meetings for the sake of meetings because meetings allow us to talk and allows us to have coffee and to have conversation about the Bills game and this thing and that thing. And that is fine occasionally, but if we make every meeting like that, eventually I think we fall into the trap of not stewarding our time well. We want to be as effective as possible. We've been going through this as a staff. There was a time, like when I came on staff, I think there was 5 of us on staff, and we would do weekly meetings every single week, every Monday at the time, and we would talk about this past Sunday, we would talk about the coming Sunday. We would talk about every aspect of the church during those staff meetings. What we found recently is now we have 12 people on staff, several of which are part-time. We have some 10-hour employees, and we have some 15-hour employees, and we realize that if we have a 2.5-hour meeting, that could be 25% of someone's work hours for the week, which is okay occasionally, but if we do that every week, are we really being as effective as possible? Do we need to does the children's director have to be part of the planning meeting for our Sunday service? Does our youth pastor have to be involved in the finance component of those staff meetings? So we're in the process of changing the way we're thinking about meetings. How can we be more effective with our time? And by the way, just as a little side note, and Pastor Rick talked about this a little bit as well, but when it comes to our time, one of the things I think that we forget about stewarding with is our Sabbath. If you think about it, if you have an employee at the church and you found out that they were, during their 8-hour workday, they were on Facebook for 6 hours of the 8 hours, we'd be pretty ticked, right? We'd have that hard conversation. Okay, you are not stewarding your time well. But if we find out that one of our employees was on their day off, they were here getting things ready, we tend to reward that rather than having the hard conversation. I remember at Next Level, one of the things that they did was if they found out an employee wasn't using all of their vacation, or at least a good chunk of their vacation, they would have that conversation with the employee, and then they would bring their spouse in and say, okay, our employee, your spouse was saying they don't need all this vacation. What do you think? Would you like them home a little bit more? And it changes, and of course, any spouse is like, yeah, I would love a little bit more help at home. And we don't want to be legalistic with that, but I think there's something to stewarding our Sabbath well also. But when it comes to stewarding our time, a couple things, just to give you a couple ideas, one of the things that I do on a personal level is I do something called an ideal work week. And what that is if you can imagine a calendar, I will write down what a perfect work week looks like for me. And it would be Monday mornings would be sermon prep, because I'm fresh for the week. By the way, I can't do sermon prep in any afternoons, any evenings. It has to be the morning. Like, I'm just too distracted in the afternoon. Afternoon is time to get emails done, time to get tasks that will take 10 minutes or less done. But I can't sit down for 4 hours in the afternoon and do a message. So for me, Monday mornings are like ideal work week, sermon prep. Monday afternoons, it's getting some tasks done. I clean the foyer. I'll catch up on email, stuff like that. Tuesdays are pretty much meeting days. We do our staff meetings. I'll do one-on-one meetings. I'll cycle through the staff. Wednesdays, same thing. Wednesday mornings are prep. Wednesday afternoons are more planning, and that's where I'm focusing on small groups and missions and doing the smaller tasks. Thursdays change every single week. But I put this on paper, and do I follow the ideal work week every week? No. I mean, that's why we call it ideal. It's what we would like a week to look like, but that guides how I schedule the rest of my day, or that guides how I schedule every single week. So I know, like, a lot of that is flexible, but 2 times that I protect are Monday mornings and Wednesday mornings. I know that is a time where I can be creative. That is the time I can spend 4 hours on a message, and I protect those times. Another thing that I was taught to do through our Next Level coaching was to move your to-do list to your calendar. This is one of the biggest breakthroughs I've had, because doing a to-do list, that is a great way to keep you busy. But if you move it to your calendar, I've found that I'm just way more effective. If it's just my to-do list, I could have 8 things on it, and if I check them all off over the course of 8 hours, I feel like I've accomplished a lot. But if I move it to my calendar, I can find that I can do that all in 2 hours. I don't need an hour to do email. I need 20 minutes to 30 minutes to get my email done. So I use a to-do list, but when I start my day, I take everything I need to do for that day, and I move it to my calendar. And if you look at my calendar, it'll be like the 4-hour message prep, and I just stick to that. And then 30 minutes email, 30 minutes making phone calls, 30 minutes prepping for a training that I'm doing later that day. But moving the to-do list to a calendar has been such a breakthrough for me. I would highly recommend that to you. And then I want to talk about the time of our people as well. We just had a conversation between really at the end of the growth group session, but into the break as well, about how our people are becoming increasingly busy. Has anyone found that out? Like, maybe 10 years ago, you could get a lot of people to a meeting, but now, like, we're lucky to get 50% of the people we need in the meeting to the meeting. So when I say time of our people, I'm talking more so volunteers. People get burned out very easily from a lot of meetings, don't they? When I worked at M&T Bank, we had a joke that what M&T stand for was meet and talk, because literally, like, 50% of our day seemed to be meetings, and it was like a meeting, and then we'll have a meeting about that meeting, and then, okay, we'll have a committee to set up meetings for those meetings. And it was just like, it just seemed like our entire, like, I would get home at the end of the day and like, what are they paying me for? I'm sitting in these meetings that I probably don't even have to be a part of. So I just believe people get burned out from meetings. So we have to ask ourselves, do we have to meet about this? Or can this be communicated via email? Can we make a quick phone call? Is there another way to communicate this information? We had a high-level volunteer step down recently, and it was for a few different reasons. One of the main reasons was she got a new job, but and it required a lot of travel. But I talked to her like during this process, and kind of like an informal exit interview, like, what could we have done better? Is there a better way that for the next person who steps into this role, is there a better way we can serve you? And she said, honestly, one of the things that was difficult, and I could probably do this position better or continue to do it even in my new role, is if there were less meetings. Because she was on our board, she was on our human resources team, she was on our finance team, so she was having regular meetings with myself. And then she was in growth groups, and it was like every single night of the week she had something going on. She had some sort of responsibility, and she said, if it wasn't for the meetings, I could probably continue to do this. And it reminded me that I like meetings because I get paid to go to meetings. Like, I'm full-time at the church. A lot of my day is spent by myself doing things, writing messages. I love evening meetings because I get to see the people that I'm serving, and we get to talk, and I get to catch up with them. And I might not see them on a Sunday morning, but I see them in meetings. But for a volunteer, that is not nearly as easy as it is for me. So I had to start reevaluating, do we need all the meetings that we're doing with the volunteers? That's why, going back to the growth groups, when we were talking about we have one training session, there was a time where our church, we did a 4-week training session for our group leaders. There's more information that we have for our group leaders. We would love to communicate, but we just know that we can burn out our leaders by having a 4-week training for something. Where if we can condense it and cut the fat on it and just keep it to a one-time thing, we just believe that we can get more out of our leaders that way. And then when we do need a meeting, because we have to do that at some point. We have to do trainings. We have to have board meetings. We have to have missions meetings. When we do that to steward our people's time well, be more organized than you think is necessary. One of the things I do for meetings is I will give a syllabus or a handout, whether I think they need the syllabus or handout or not, because what that does is communicates with them. I thought through what we're going to talk about, and we're not meeting just for the sake of seeing each other. We have some real things that we need to talk about. I set the room up. Usually it's in the conference room. Depending on the size, I might change it into rows. I'll have even a devotional, like a video ready. The more prepared I am, the more that communicates to our people that your time is valuable. I understand that, so we have some things that we're going to talk about, and we're not just going to meet for the sake of seeing each other. Beth Cray, who is our kids director here at the Akron campus, she, just like many of our ministry teams, she does a huddle every single Sunday with her team. And one of the things that I love that she does is she writes out a script for her huddles. Now, she's not reading out the script, but she's writing it out, and she'll read through it a couple times prior to the huddle, because what that does is it avoids her from getting to the huddle and saying, hey, how's everyone doing? All right, we're going to have a good Sunday today. Let's pray, and you go on. But what that does is it reminds her to state a vision, like let's share a win, let's communicate the vision of our team, keeps her on point. It reminds her of things that maybe she needs to communicate. But it's being intentional about the time of our people. I think it was 2 weeks ago, we had this tech person. They were running the sound, and I just happened to come in for rehearsal for our worship team. And I go up to him, and it seemed like the rehearsal was running a little late. And I'm like, hey, how's everything going? And he looked at me, and he said, I just want to go home. And because he had told me he came from work, and he came directly here, and he was here a little bit early to set up. And now rehearsal is running 20 to 30 minutes late. And I thought, we could possibly lose this volunteer because we're not necessarily communicating to him that his time is important to us, because our rehearsal was going 20 to 30 minutes late. So all that to say, the last thing about time is start and end everything on time. If our volunteers show up to a rehearsal, if they show up to a meeting and we're scrambling and we're making the coffee still and we're trying to load the slides on the TVs or whatever, what that communicates is we weren't prepared for you. Your time's not valuable. And I think running late is even worse. Oh yeah, we don't care that you have a family and that you have dinner reservations. It's communicating the wrong thing. So we want to steward the time of our people well. And then the fourth fill-in is the finances. Finances of our church. I think the question that I always ask, I oversee the budget and the finances of the church, is what is our church finances serving? Same thing with all these. If we don't steward the money of our church well, I believe that God will eventually move those resources to another church. I believe that's why some churches close down, is that maybe it's a matter of all four of these, but when we're stewarding something incorrectly, eventually God's just going to move those resources to someone else who has shown that they can steward the resources well. So when it comes to the church budget, what I used to do is I would create the budget, and then based on the budget, I would create the strategic plan for the ministries that I would lead. I would just encourage you, if you're a lead pastor, if you're someone that's involved in the overall finances of the church, is to start with the strategic plan and build the budget around that. So for example, one thing that you can do is you budget the vision items first. For our church, this past year, that involved three things primarily. Missions. We just realized as a church, like we want to put more of our resources outside of the four walls of this church. We wanted to increase, and we wanted to increase quite a bit. So the first budget line that I did when I created the budget was our missions budget. This is what we want it to be this year, and we allowed because in previous years, honestly, it was the margin that our missions budget came out of. What do we have left over? Then we'll give it outside. We felt called to reverse that and start with the missions budget. The second thing is groups. We knew we wanted to do this 40 days of prayer, and one of the things we did was we bought all the books for all the members, which we ordered 275 books. They were $12.99 each, so you could do the math. That was a pretty expensive investment. In previous years, we would budget, I don't know, $500 to $1,500 a year on groups. This year, we knew this was a direction, like we wanted to start the year off running with groups. So we had to budget a lot more. That was a big vision thing for our church. And then the other thing this one, not so much this year, we started this, I think, 3 years ago. We started to budget on the front end leadership. So we would, for every employee that we have, we started to budget $1,000 for leadership. What that would cover would be conferences, materials, books, like little events that we would do. And that is a big investment for our church, but we just believe that if we invest this amount, it will pay for itself in the long run. Like this will help develop our staff, our leaders. We'll be able to bring volunteers if we budget this amount. So that was something we did on the front end, and then we built the rest of the budget around it. So again, starts with the strategic plan. What am I trying to accomplish? What is the vision of my church? And allow the budget to serve the vision rather than the vision serving the budget. And then I just wanted to share a few targets that we have. So when it comes to the overall budget, we kind of break it down in percentages. So how we spend our budget is 50% of our budget is salaries. Everything with salaries, we're just in a position where all of our employees have spouses that have insurance, or they're able to get it through the states. So we keep the salary portion, what is going to our staff, to 50%. Now, that fluctuates anywhere from 45 to 55. We view it, if we get down to 45%, we now have the margin to make another hire. If it's ever 55%, we're not hiring anyone. We're not increasing hours. We try to keep it as close to 50 as possible. And the other marker for that, we do one full-time equivalent for every 100 people. So we have 12 people on staff, but full-time equivalents, we have, I think it's 5.8. So we're not, like, you know what I'm saying with full-time equivalent? Like 4 10-hour employees would be one full-time equivalent. So we try to keep it for one FTE for every 100 people. So we're averaging between 500 to 600 people. We're at 5.8. So it's just kind of a little marker to keep us from being understaffed or overstaffed. So 50% salary. The other target is 10% missions or outside the church. We incorporate things like church planting in this, like money we'll give to other churches. Right now, we're a little bit less than this, but we're about double where we were last year. So we're working our way to the 10% to go outside of the church. Another target that we have is 30% operations. That would be everything from mortgage to ministries to things that keep the church going. Right now, we're honestly at about 40%, but like our target is to be 30%. So we want to get our operational costs down slightly. And then the last one is 10% savings. We currently don't budget this in. What we have been doing is we do a zero-based budget and our giving increases. So everything that is additional, we put towards savings, or we call it our next project fund. But ideally, where we would be and what our long-term target is to be 10% savings, 10% giving, 50% salary, and then 30% operations. And again, I just want to give you those percentages because in the past, we've looked at our budget and we would start at random spots, start at ministries one year, start at salaries. But these are kind of target points for us. Are we going to stay directly at 50% salaries all the time? No, it's going to fluctuate. All these things are going to fluctuate. Depending on your context, you may be in a situation where you are debt-free, so you don't have to worry too much about the operational costs, and so you could give a little bit more to salary. That's fine. I'm just sharing what we do, and I would encourage you to think, first figure out what percentages are we putting towards each area, and where do we actually want to be. Then set a target, and make it a 3 to 5 year goal that I'm going to move towards this target. That's what we did with missions. We just saw, like, you know what, we're not doing enough for missions, so we set a target, and we're going to work our way there over the next 5 years. So that is just a little bit on organizational stewardship. Does anyone have any questions?